All right. Um, so today we are starting with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Skandha 6, Discourse 18, which is an account of the birth of the Maruts, the 49 wind gods. Hi, Andy.
Hey, aloha.
All right, we're just starting. This is Book 6, Discourse 18.
Awesome. I'm driving, so I'm just listening.
Sure, sounds good.
Thank you. Om Shri.
Sri Shuka began again. This is another thing where he was giving a genealogy and went on a very long side branch about the into the whole story of Indra and Vritra, and then Vritra's past life as Chitraketu, and is now picking up where he was before all that. Sri Shuka began again. Prishni, the spouse of Savitta, the fifth of the 12 Adityas, the sons of Aditi. So we're talking about each of the children of the Adityas. We've already talked about Vivasvan, Aryama, Pusha, and Tvashta. Prishni, the spouse of Savitta, brought forth 3 daughters. Savitri, that's also the goddess Gayatri Mata, the goddess presiding over the holy Gayatri mantra. So the Savitri Gayatri mantra, it invokes the male god Savitur, but the mantra itself is the goddess Savitri. So that's what's being referred to there. Vyahriti, the goddess presiding over the 3 mystical syllables Bhu, Bhuva, and Svaha, which represent the earth, the atmosphere, and heaven. And the goddess Trayi, the goddess presiding over the rituals, the subject matter of the 3 Vedas, the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, and the Sama Veda. And they also had 9 sons. Agnihotra, the deity presiding over the Agnihotra offerings. Pashu, the deity presiding over animal sacrifices. Soma, the deity presiding over a Soma sacrifice. This is different from Soma Deva, as in Chandra Deva, the moon god. This is specifically the presiding deity over the Soma Yajna, a more obscure deity. Chaturmasya, the deity presiding over the 3 sacrifices, the 3 Chaturmasa Yajnas performed at the beginning of the 3 thirds of the year. And the 5 deities presiding over the 5 great daily yajnas enjoined on every householder of the 3 twice-born classes. These are the Deva Yajna, or offering to the Devas, Rishi Yajna, or offering to the Rishis, which is not a ritual offering, but is done by studying the Rishis' teachings as the way to honor them. Pitra Yajna, which is offering to one's ancestors. Manusya Yajna, which is offering to humans in need. And Bhuta Yajna, which is offering to spirits and other living beings. Siddhi, the spouse of Bhaga, the 6th Aditya, dear Parikshit, bore Mahima, Vibhu, and Prabhu, and a beautiful and virtuous daughter, Ashisha. The wives of Dhata, the 7th Aditya, Kuhu, the deity presiding over the last night of a dark fortnight. So the day before the new moon. Sinivali, the deity presiding over the 14th night of a dark fortnight. So the goddess of the dark moon. Raka, the deity presiding over the last night of a bright fortnight. And Anumati, the deity presiding over the 14th night of a bright fortnight, the goddess of the full moon. Severally gave birth to Sayam, the god of dusk, Darsha, the deity presiding over the last day of a dark fortnight, Prata, the god of the morning, and Puranamasa, the deity presiding over the last day of a bright fortnight. So a dark fortnight is the 2 weeks during which the moon is waning, and a bright fortnight are the 2 weeks during which the moon is waxing. That's what's meant by bright and dark fortnights. Vidhata, the 8th Aditya, begot through the goddess Kriya the 5 deities presiding over the sacred fires bearing the name of Purishya. The spouse of Varuna, the god of water, and the 9th Aditya, was named Charshani. She's often called Varuni or Varunani after her husband, but her actual name is Charshani, of whom was reborn the sage Bhrigu, who originally was a mind-born son of Brahma, but his body died, so he took birth again through her. And the great yogi Valmiki, another son of Varuna and the celebrated author of the Ramayana, sprang up, it is said, from an anthill, while the sages Agastya and Vasishta, the sons of the sages Pulastya and Brahma, respectively, were reborn as the sons of the gods Mitra, the 10th Aditya, and Varuna, who discharged in a jar their vital fluid that had escaped in the presence of the Apsara Urvashi. That's a whole story. How they had 2 children without mothers who just grew in a jar or in a pot. The god Mitra begot through Revati 3 children, Utsarga, Arishta, and Pippala. Indra, the lord of paradise and the 11th Aditya, procreated through his wife Shachi, the daughter of Pulomasura. So his daughter, Indra's wife, is an Asura who married into the Devas. And they had 3 sons, O dear Parikshit, Jayanta, Rishabha, and Midvan. This is what we have heard. From Lord Upendra, the 12th and youngest son of Aditi. This is the Vamana avatara of Vishnu. He's also called Upendra, who assumed the form of the divine dwarf by his Maya. Through his spouse, Kirti, sprang up a son, Brahachloka, and from the latter sprang up Saubhaga and other sons. We shall recount later on in Book 8 of the Bhagavatam the distinguished achievements, excellences, and deeds of valor of that high-souled son of the sage Kashyapa, and how he actually descended through Aditi, so the whole Vamana avatarana. I now tell you about the scions of the sage Kashyapa by Diti, among whom was born the illustrious devotee of the Lord Prahlada, and even so Bali, Prahlada's grandson. Diti had only 2 sons at first, adored by the Daityas and the Danavas, who have been spoken of under the name of Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. We talked about them way back in Book 3 of the Bhagavatam. Hiranyakashipu's wife, Kayadhu by name, who was a daughter of Jambha by Danu and had been given away by the former to Hiranyakashipu, gave birth to 4 sons, Samhrada in the first instance, and then Anuhrada, Hrada, and Prahlada as well. So most often, Hiranyakashipu's youngest son is called Prahlada with a la, but the name is also sometimes spelled Prahrada, as in hra, like an HR, but it's just 2 different forms of the same name. Their sister, Singhika by name, got from her husband, the Asura Viprachiti, Rahu, whose head, even while he was drinking Amratam, Srihari lopped off with his chakra. That story will be told in Book 8. Priti, the wife of Samhrada, Hiranyakashipu's eldest son, bore through him a son named Panchajana. Dhamani, the wife of Hrada, Hiranyakashipu's 3rd son, had 2 sons, Vatapi and Ilvala. It was Ilvala who cooked his brother Vatapi for the sake of his guest Agastya. That's a whole other story. Bashkala and Mahisha were the 2 sons of Anuhrada, Hiranyakashipu's 2nd son, by his wife Surmya, while Virochana was the son of Prahlada, and Bali was the son of Virochana, by his wife Devi. From Bali, through his wife Ashanaya, she is the Asura goddess of hunger, were born 100 sons, the eldest of whom was Bana. The glory of Bali, there's a whole story about Bana coming later on in book, pretty sure it's Book 10, but it might be Book 11 of the Bhagavatam. The glory of Bali, which deserves to be celebrated in beautiful verse, will be recounted only hereafter in Book 8, although there's actually already been quite a bit of praise of Bali back in Book 5. Having propitiated Lord Shiva, who has his abode on Mount Kailasa, Banasura attained the first place among Shiva's attendants. As the guardian of his capital, the Lord actually stays near him even today. So after Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, Diti had 49 more sons, the Maruts or wind gods. They all remained issueless and were converted into, Indra converted them into his own class. The Raja said, having rid them of their asuric disposition, which was innate to them, O Guru, how are they converted into devahood by Indra? What good offices did they render to him? Even these rishis, O Brahmana, are keen to know this truth along with me. Therefore, be pleased, O worshipful sage, to explain this to us. Sutta continued. Having heard this reverent, brief, and significant inquiry of Raja Parikshit, who had been protected by Lord Vishnu himself in the form of Sri Krishna, and welcoming it with a heart full of joy, the omniscient and well-known sage Shuka, the son of Badarayana, spoke, O Shaunaka. Sri Shuka resumed. Diti, whose sons Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha had been slain by Lord Vishnu, the ally of the chief of the Devas, and who was burning with rage kindled by grief, pondered as follows. When shall I have an undisturbed sleep, having brought about the death of the voluptuous, cruel, hard-hearted, and sinful Indra, who has been instrumental in causing the death of his own half-brothers? He who seeks to hurt beings for the sake of his own body, which, though designated as a king, ultimately goes by the name of worms, or that of excrement or that of ashes, meaning that this will be the fate of Indra's body one day. Is he alive to his interests? For damnation follows from such hostility to other beings. Let me devise some means whereby a son may be born to me that may quell the pride of the aforesaid Indra, who looks upon this body as everlasting and whose mind knows no restraint. With this idea, she constantly pleased her husband, the sage Kashyapa, through service, affection, humility, and self-control. Knowing as she did the heart of her husband, she captivated his mind, O Parikshit, by her supreme devotion, charming and sweet words, winsome smiles, and sidelong glances. Thus infatuated by that clever lady and powerless against her charms, the sage, though learned, said, all right, such stupefaction of men by a woman indeed is not to be wondered at. Finding men unattached at the dawn of creation, Brahma Prajapati converted one half of his body into the fair sex, which robbed men of their judgment. Indeed, we had this story earlier when Brahma originally created beings genderless, neither men nor women, and with the ability to reproduce asexually, but found that they lacked the motive to do so. And they didn't reproduce enough to sustain or grow a population. And so using sexual reproduction was his take two, which worked much better for propagating large populations. Waited upon in this way, O dear son, by that lady, the glorious sage Kashyapa felt highly pleased, and welcoming her, he laughingly spoke. Kashyapa said, ask a boon of your choice, O beautiful one. I am pleased with you, O irreproachable lady. When the husband is fully pleased, what desire of a woman remains unattainable here as well as hereafter? The husband alone has been declared to be the supreme deity for women, he says rather self-congratulatorily. Although Lord Vasudeva, the consort of Sri, dwelling in the mind of all created beings, is the supreme deity, it is the said Lord alone who is worshipped by men in the guise of divinities diversely conceived under names and forms, and it is he who is worshipped by women as appearing in the form of their husband. Hence, women devoted to their husband and desirous of blessedness, O fair one, worship their husband as an image of God, the soul of the universe, with undivided loyalty. Therefore, devoutly worshipped by you, O blessed one, with such God consciousness, I shall forthwith accomplish your desired object, which is something very difficult to attain for unchaste women. Diti replied, If you would confer on me the boon of my choice, O Holy One, I who have lost my sons seek an immortal son capable of slaying Indra, who caused both of my sons to be slain. Hearing her prayer, the Brahmana sage became sad and fell repenting. He thought to himself, alas, a very great sin has overtaken me today. Oh, given up to the gratification of my senses, I, a wretched fellow whose mind has been caught in the grip of the Lord's Maya in the form of woman today, shall surely fall into Naraka. What fault is there of the woman who has but followed her own nature in this matter? But fie upon me, ignorant that I am, alas, of my own interests, as I have not been able to conquer my mind. The face of women is blooming like the autumnal lotus, and their speech is nectar to the ears, while their heart is like the blade of a razor. Who can know their ways? None is truly beloved of women, who have their mind fixed on the object of their own desire. To serve their end, they murder or cause to be murdered their own husband, son, or brother. Obviously, he's rather upset about the situation. My plighted word that I shall confer the boon of her choice should not prove untrue. But Indra too does not deserve death. Under such circumstances, the expedient that I have hit upon is in the fitness of things. Pondering thus, the glorious sage, Kashyapa, the son of Marichi, O delight of the Kurus, spoke a bit angrily, condemning himself at the same time. Kashyapa said, a son will be born to you, O blessed one, who will slay Indra, if you will duly observe this vow for a year, but who will prove to be a friend of the Devas if it is not properly observed. Diti replied, I shall observe the vow, O holy Brahmana. Tell me what has to be done by me, and all that is prohibited during the period of this vow, and also that which may not violate the vow. Kashyapa said, a woman observing this vow must not injure the multitudes of living beings, nor curse anyone, nor should she tell a lie. She must not pare her nails or cut the hair on her person, nor should she touch that which is impure. She must not bathe in water, nor should she lose her temper, nor talk with wicked people. She must not wear a cloth that has not been washed, nor a garland that has been worn on her person before. She must not eat the leavings of what has been eaten by someone, nor the food offered to goddess Chandika, nor that which contains meat, nor that fetched by a Shudra, nor that which has been seen by a woman in her menstruation, nor again should she drink water with the hollow of her joined palms. She must not stir out with the remnants of food sticking in her mouth, meaning she can't leave the house before cleaning her, like brushing her teeth or washing out her mouth after eating. Nor without washing her hands and feet, nor at dusk, nor with disheveled hair, nor with her person unadorned and unwrapped, nor with her speech uncontrolled. She must not retire with her feet unwashed, nor in an impure state, nor with wet feet, nor with her head towards the north or the west, nor in the same bed with others, nor bare-bodied, nor again in the morning and evening. Putting on a pair of clothes that have been washed, ever pure and decked with all auspicious ornaments, she should worship before breakfast the cow, the Brahmanas, the goddess Sri, and Lord Vishnu. She should also worship women whose husbands are living with garlands, sandal paste, offerings of food and ornaments, and offering worship to her husband should wait upon him and contemplate on him as having entered her womb, meaning that his energy has entered her womb. If you observe this vow, the Pumsavana, which is of a year's duration, without violating it, a son will be born to you who will be able to slay Indra. So Kashyapa could have granted her such a son without her going through this vow. He's giving her such a difficult vow specifically because he wants her to fail one of these requirements. Expressing her willingness in the words, very well, the strong-willed Diti, O Parikshit, then conceived the seed of Kashyapa, and she also duly undertook the vow. Having come to know the intention of his mother's sister, O respectful king, the clever Indra waited upon Diti, who was living in a hermitage through service. He fetched, I suspect that he came to know this because Kashyapa warned him, since of course Kashyapa never promised Diti that he wouldn't do that. So Indra fetched every day from the woods at the proper time flowers, fruits, roots, small pieces of wood for the sacrificial fire, and blades of the sacred kusha grass, as well as sacred leaves and sprouts, earth and water. Keen to discover a slip in the observance on the part of Diti, who had been duly adhering to the vow, O Parikshit, the crooked Indra continued to serve her like a hunter disguised as game. Though intent upon detecting some fault in her observance, O ruler of the earth, Indra did not find any. He was now filled with grave anxiety as to how his welfare could be ensured in that life, since he knows that if she gets to the end of her pregnancy without breaking any of these rules, then her son will be empowered to kill him. One day, however, she fell asleep at dusk, with remnants of food still in her mouth, and without either rinsing her mouth or washing her feet, enfeebled as she was by her austere observance and deluded by fate. Finding that weak point, Indra, the master of the mystic powers of yoga, entered by dint of his yogic power the uterus of Diti, who had been robbed of her consciousness by sleep. By means of his thunderbolt, he cut the embryo, brilliant as gold, into 7 pieces. Addressing the crying embryo in the words, "Do not cry," he further cut those pieces each into 7. While being thus rent, O Parikshit, they all submitted to him with joined palms. "Why do you seek to get rid of us, O Indra? We are Maruts, the wind gods, your own half-brothers. Do not be afraid, you are and do not be afraid, you are brothers to me." So did Kaushika, which is a name of Indra, reply to the 7 groups of 7 Maruts, his attendants exclusively attached to him. By the grace of the abode of the goddess Sri, which the abode of the goddess Sri is Vishnu, in whose heart she always abides, the embryo in the womb of Diti could not be killed, though cut into 49 pieces by the thunderbolt, any more than you, O Parikshit, were killed by the missile discharged by Ashvatthama, the son of Drona, since Parikshit similarly was attacked by a supernatural weapon while in his mother's womb, and similarly survived. Worshipping the most ancient person only once, a man attains a status similar to the Lord's, whereas Sri Hari was worshipped by Diti for a little less than a year. So together with Indra, their friend and leader, these Maruts came to be known as the 50 wind gods, the 49 Maruts plus Indra. The stigma attaching to them because of their mother was wiped off when they were converted into devas, entitled to the Amrita by Indra. On waking up, the worshipful Diti, who having acquired a disposition absolutely free from reproach, saw the babies, brilliant as fire, accompanied by Indra, and felt highly gratified. Despite the fact that this thwarted her initial vengeful desires, her consciousness has been purified by her long asceticism. And she said to Indra, "Dear son, desirous of obtaining a son that might prove a source of terror to the sons of Aditi, I observed this vow, which is most difficult to undertake. But while only one son was coveted by me, how did these 49 babies come to be born? Tell me the truth if you know it, but don't utter a falsehood." Indra replied, "Mother, having come to know of your vow, I sought your presence, and having discovered your fault, cut the child in your womb, bent as I was on achieving my end, and lost to all sense of righteousness. The embryo was cut by me in 7, and there appeared 7 children. They too were cut each in 7, yet they would not die. Seeing that great miracle, I at last concluded that it must be some incidental reward of the worship of the Supreme Person. They alone are declared as clever in accomplishing their object, who while engaged in propitiating the Lord are free from desires and do not aspire to attain even the final moksha. Having propitiated the Lord, the ruler of the universe, who is not only the self of us all, but who bestows his very self on his devotees, what wise man would ask of him the pleasures of sense, which could be had even in the Narakas? Therefore, may you be pleased to forgive, O mother, this act of wickedness on my part, foolish as I am, O highly noble lady. Thank God the child in your womb has risen to life after death." Sri Shuka went on, Permitted by Diti, who was pleased with his sincerity, the powerful Indra bowed to her and left for the third heaven, that being his own Svargaloka, along with the Maruts. In this way, I have told you all that you inquired of me regarding the story of the auspicious birth of the Maruts. What more shall I speak to you about? Thus ends the 18th discourse entitled An Account of the Birth of the Maruts in Book 6 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 19. And this is the last discourse of Book 6, so we're going to start into Book 7 today as well. This last discourse of Book 6 is the procedure of observing the sacred vow of Pumsavana. The Raja said, I wish to know the procedure of observing the vow of Pumsavana, which has just been mentioned by you, O Holy One, and by which Lord Vishnu is propitiated. Obviously, we got the procedure in some detail, as Kashyapa told it to Diti, but he's asking for a more detailed account, since Shuka was telling it as part of the story and not as part of actually instructing everything you would need to know to do it. Sri Shuka replied, a wife should start observing this vow, which is calculated to grant all one's desires, from the very first day of the bright fortnight of the lunar month of Margashirsha, with the permission of her husband. Having listened to the story of the birth of the Maruts, the 49 wind gods, and consulted the Brahmanas, she should, after cleaning her teeth and finishing her bath, cover herself with a pair of white pieces of cloth and adorn herself with ornaments. She should then worship the Lord along with Sri before her breakfast with the prayer, whatever you already have is enough for you, unconcerned as you are, O Lord whose desire is sated. My obeisance be to you, the Lord of Mahalakshmi, who embodies in herself the highest glory and fortune. Hail to you, the abode of all mystic powers. You are fully endowed with compassion, fortune, glory, majesty, virility, and all other excellences, O Lord. You are therefore the almighty ruler. O consort of Lord Vishnu, O embodiment of marvelous powers, possessing as you do the characteristics of the Supreme Person, may you be blessed with me, may you be pleased with me, O highly blessed one. Obeisance be to you, O Mother of the universe. Hail to the Supreme Person, denoted by the mystical syllable Om, and possessed of the highest glory, the spouse of Goddess Mahalakshmi. Let me offer worship to you along with your highest potencies. While repeating this sacred text, the worshipper should offer every day to Lord Vishnu with a consecrated mind, loving invocation, water to wash his hands and feet and rinse his mouth, and water for his bath, a pair of pieces of linen to cover his body, a sacred thread and ornaments, sandal paste, flowers, burning incense, light, meaning like a diya, food and other articles of worship. Out of the food left after being offered to the Lord, one should pour 12 oblations into the sacred fire while repeating the following prayer. Hail to the Supreme Person, denoted by the mystical syllable Om, the spouse of Goddess Mahalakshmi. I offer this oblation to him. One should duly worship with devotion every day Goddess Sri and Lord Vishnu, both of whom are disposed to confer boons and yield one's desired blessings in an abundant degree if one is desirous of having all kinds of fortune. One should fall prostrate on the ground with a mind humble through devotion, repeat the aforementioned sacred text 10 times, and then utter the following hymn. You are the sovereigns of the universe as well as the ultimate cause of the world. Mahalakshmi is undoubtedly the unmanifest Prakriti, as well as the deluding potency, or Mahamaya, difficult to overcome. You are no other than the Supreme Person, the very controller of Prakriti. You embody all sacrificial performances, while she is an embodiment of faith, or of Sraddha. While she is activity, you are the enjoyer of its fruit. This goddess is the manifestation of the gunas, while you are the time spirit, as well as the cosmic person. You are the soul of all embodied beings, while Goddess Sri represents their body, their senses, and the inner sense. The Almighty Goddess represents the various names and forms, while you are their illuminator and ground. As you are the supreme rulers of the three worlds, conferring boons on your devotees, so let my lofty aspirations prove true, O Lord of excellent renown. Having thus extolled Lord Vishnu, the abode of Sri, the bestower of boons, along with the goddess Sri. And after removing the food that one had served before them and offering them water to rinse their mouth, one should continue to worship them by offering betel leaves, etc. Then, with a mind humble through devotion, one should extol him by means of a hymn, another hymn, and after smelling the remnants of the offerings, should duly worship Sri Hari once more. The woman should serve her husband too with supreme devotion, offering him his beloved objects and accounting him the supreme person himself, while the loving husband should personally assist in all of the duties of his wife, high and low alike. A thing done by even one of a married couple is conducive to the benefit of both. In the event of the wife being unfit to perform any particular duty due to illness or menstruation or any other reason, the husband should do all of her duties with a concentrated mind. A man observing this vow sacred to Lord Vishnu should not break it under any circumstance whatsoever. Observing discipline, one should worship every day with devotion the Brahmanas, as well as women whose husbands are living, by offering them wreaths of flowers, sandal paste, cooked food, and ornaments, and should also worship the deity. Having requested the deity to retire to his abode, meaning performed the Visarjana at the end of the puja, one should eat what was offered to him, after feeding in the first instance one's guru and others, for the purification of one's mind as well as for the gratification of all one's desires. After spending a year of 12 months, according to this process of worship, so meaning that if it's the leap year, which adds a 13th lunar month, then you only have to do 12 months. So after doing this for 12 months, 12 moons, a pious wife should observe a fast on the last day of the lunar month of Kartika, the day immediately preceding the waxing of the Margashirsha moon. Having bathed at sunrise on the following day and worshipped the enchanter of all as before, the husband alone should pour into the sacred fire 12 oblations of rice boiled in milk and mixed with ghee, according to the procedure laid down for a Paka Yajna, which is a variety of yajna described in the Grihya Sutras. Receiving with his head bent low the benedictions duly pronounced by the Brahmanas, pleased with him and devoutly greeting them with bowed head, he should silently take his meal with their permission, along with his kinsmen, after feeding his guru in the first instance. He should give to his wife the remnant of the sacrificial offering, which ensures a good progeny and the height of good fortune. Duly observing this vow, sacred to the Lord, a man attains his coveted objects during his lifetime, while a wife undertaking it should secure good fortune, affluence, progeny, the longevity of her husband, glory, and a house. Nay, a maid should secure a match endowed with all good characteristics, while a widow should attain final moksha after being rid of all her sins. A woman who has lost her issue should get long-lived progeny, meaning who has suffered either a miscarriage or whose child has died. A woman who, though owning a large property, is highly ill-fated, is blessed with good fortune, and an ugly-looking girl is endowed with exquisite beauty. He who is suffering from a malady is rid of his acute illness and is blessed with a sound body and healthy indriyas. There ensues the eternal gratification of the souls of the departed ancestors, as well as of the tutelary deities, of the man who recites this discourse on the occasion of auspicious undertaking, such as the performance of a yajna or at the sraddha rite, which is the offering to one's ancestors. Pleased with him, the fire god, the goddess Sri, as well as Lord Sri Hari himself, confer on him all the objects of his desire at the end of a sacrificial performance. O Raja, the highly sacred story of the birth of the Maruts, as well as of the very sacred vow observed by Diti, has been related to you. Thus ends the 19th discourse, entitled The Procedure of Observing the Vow of Pumsavana, detailed in Book 6 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Sanghita, composed by the divine sage Veda Vyasa and consisting of 18,000 shlokas. End of Book 6. And we will start in with the first discourse or two of Book 7. Discourse 1 is a dialogue between Narada and Yudhishthira on the story of Jaya and Vijaya. So Parikshit submitted, "How did the Lord, who was alike to everyone and is the beloved friend of all created beings, kill the sons of Diti for the sake of Indra, like a partial being, O Holy One," meaning the first two sons of Diti, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. "Indeed, he who was the very embodiment of highest bliss could not have any selfish ends to be served by the hosts of devas, and in no case could he who is untainted by the gunas actually have any specific grudge against, much less fear of, the asuras. In this way, O exceptionally blessed one, a grave doubt has arisen in our mind with regard to the excellences of Lord Narayana, which you should kindly resolve." Sri Shuka replied, "Well have you asked, O Maharaja, a question relating to the wonderful and most sacred story of Sri Hari, which is replete with the glory of his devotees, nay, which goes to intensify one's devotion to the Lord and which is sung by sages like Narada. Bowing to my father, the sage Krishna Dvaipayana, I shall narrate the story of Sri Hari." So just to remind everyone, Veda Vyasa, Krishna Dvaipayana, and Badarayana are all the same man. He has quite a few names and titles. "Though really transcending Prakriti and beyond the gunas, unborn and devoid of a form, the Lord assumed the role of a chastiser in relation to those deserving punishment by presiding over the gunas of his own Maya. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas are the adjuncts of Prakriti, not of the spirit. Their decline or growth, O Raja, is not simultaneous, as a matter of fact. Conforming to the spirit of the times, he fosters the devas and the rishis when Sattva is in the ascendant, the asuras when Rajas is predominant, and the yakshas and the rakshasas when Tamas preponderates. Like fire and other elements, the Lord appears endowed with various forms, yet he is not distinguished from the psychophysical organism. It is only the discerning that are eventually able to realize the self dwelling in their own heart after carefully investigating it. When intending to create bodies for the jiva, the aforesaid supreme evolves Rajas as a distinct entity out of the chaos hitherto prevailing by his own Maya. Keen to sport in the midst of these heterogeneous bodies, the omnipotent Lord evolves the Sattva Guna, and when about to retire, he fosters the element of Tamas. The Lord, who is the infallible ruler among men, brings forth the running time, which stands as the support of Prakriti and Purusha. Now that which goes by the name of time, O Parikshit, fosters the element of Sattva. Hence the Lord, too, who enjoys an extensive fame, fosters, as it were, the hosts of devas as their friend, and exterminates their enemies, the asuras, dominated as they are by Rajas and Tamas. To illustrate this very fact, a legend was lovingly narrated in the past by the Devarishi Narada to the inquiring Emperor Yudhishthira, in whose eye no enemy was ever born. In other words, who never looked on anyone as his enemy. During his great sacrificial performance of the Rajasuya, O Parikshit, on seeing the most wonderful absorption of Shishupala, the ruler of the kingdom of Chedi, into the divine person of Lord Sri Krishna, the son of Vasudeva, in the course of the great sacrificial performance called Rajasuya, the celebrated king Yudhishthira, son of Pandu, asked the Devarishi Narada seated there, with a wondering mind, the following question in the presence of the other sages who were listening. So this references a very famous story from the Mahabharata, and the Bhagavatam here, as in many other places, assumes that its readers are familiar in detail with the Mahabharata. But just to recap, in case anyone doesn't remember this story, at the Rajasuya, the royal consecration yajna of Yudhishthira, Shishupala, the Raja of Chedi, attacked Krishna. They were bitter enemies, and Krishna killed him right there in the court, in the middle of the yajna. And visibly to everyone, the glowing inner soul emerged from the decapitated corpse of Shishupala and merged into the body of Krishna. So that's the series of events that's being referred to here. And then Yudhishthira, having just watched that happen, said, the absorption into the son of Vasudeva, the supreme reality which could not be easily attained even by those exclusively devoted to him, of the ruler of the kingdom of Chedi, his bitter enemy. Oh, this was indeed most wonderful. We all, as a matter of fact, wish to know the reason of this, O sage. For we know that Raja Vena, the father of Prithu, was all but hurled into Naraka by the Brahmanas due to his blaspheming the Lord. The sinful Shishupala, the son of Damaghosha, as well as the evil-minded Dandavaktra, had a grudge against Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, ever since he began to lisp till now. He's insultingly referring to him as lisping or speaking in a muddied way, as a way of referring to him. What he was doing was slandering Krishna and verbally attacking him. White leprosy did not appear on their tongue, even as they blasphemed more than once Sri Krishna, the all-pervading Lord, who is the supreme and imperishable absolute Brahman. Nor did they enter the blinding darkness. How did they attain absorption directly into the aforesaid Lord, whose reality cannot be easily grasped, while all the people stood looking on? My mind is wavering on this point, even as the flame of a light is unsteady under the action of wind. This was most wonderful. Omniscient as you are, kindly tell me the cause of it. Sri Shukra went on. The Devarishi Narada was pleased to hear this question of Raja Yudhishthira, and addressing him, narrated the following stories within the hearing of his courtiers. Narada said, the body is brought into being through lack of discrimination, O Raja, between Prakriti and Purusha, for calumny and eulogy, honor and contumely. Just as due to identification with this body appears in living beings in this world, differentiation in the shape of I and mine, and there arises pain as a result of resort to force and reproachful language, and even as the destruction of living beings is considered non-different from the destruction of the body to which attaches the aforesaid notion, there is no such notion in Sri Krishna, the universal spirit, because of his being one without a second. On what ground, then, can violence be ascribed to him, who was indeed the chastiser of his foes in their own interests? Therefore, one should fix one's mind on him, either through constant enmity or through devotion, or fear, or affection, or love. By doing so, he will in no way perceive anything else than the Lord. A mortal may not attain such absorption into him by fixing his mind on him through devotion, as through constant hostility. Such is my conclusion. The caterpillar imprisoned by a wasp on a wall, and constantly thinking of the latter, the wasp, through hatred and fear, attains a form similar to the wasp. In other words, it will be, if a caterpillar killed by a wasp dies while intensely thinking about the wasp, it will most likely be reborn as a wasp as a result. With their sins thus washed off by constant contemplation through animosity on the Almighty Lord Sri Krishna, who appeared as a human being by his own will, people attained to him. Fixing their mind on the Almighty Lord through concupiscence, hatred, fear, or attachment as through devotion, and getting rid of their sins standing as a barrier against his realization, many attained union with him. The cowherd women of Raja attained to him through concupiscence, in other words, through sexual and romantic attraction to him. Kansa, through fear of him. The ruler of the Chedis and other Rajas, through hatred. The Vrishnis, through kinship. You, the Pandava brothers, through attachment. And we, the sages, through devotion, O Lord. Vena stood no chance of attaining to the Lord in this way, because he did not fall under any of the 5 categories of those contemplating on the Lord. Hence, by any means whatsoever, one should fix one's mind on the all-enchanting supreme deity. The ruler of the Chedis, your maternal aunt's son, as well as Dantavaktra, son of another maternal aunt of yours, O son of Pandu, were the 2 foremost attendants of Lord Vishnu, hurled down from their abode under the curse of the Brahmana sages. Yudhishthira said, what kind of and whose curse was it that prevailed against the servants of Lord Sri Hari? The incarnation of those exclusively devoted to Sri Hari appears as something incredible, that they would be drawn into bodies. Be pleased to narrate the episode connected with the corporeal existence of the denizens of Vaikuntapura, devoid of body, indriyas, and life breath. Narada replied, traversing the three spheres, in this case meaning heaven, the earth, and the atmospheric regions in between, the sage Sanandana and his brothers, all of them sons of Brahma, the creator, once went to the realm of Lord Vishnu by the Lord's will. Though born before the elders, indeed before everyone, they were some of the firstborn beings in all of creation. They look like children of 5 to 6 years of age and have no covering on their body except the quarters, meaning that they are naked. Accounting them infants, the two gatekeepers stopped them. Full of anger, they cursed them thus. You do not even deserve to dwell at the soles of the feet of Madhusudana, which are free from rajas and tamas. Therefore enter you at once, O fools, the most sinful demoniac womb. Cursed in the aforesaid words, the two gatekeepers were, while falling down from their abode, addressed once more by the merciful sages, let this imprecation make for your return to your realm at the end of 3 incarnations. So Narada here is telling a very abbreviated version of the story. We actually had a longer version earlier in the Bhagavata, that they were offered a choice between 7 incarnations as devotees or 3 as enemies of Vishnu. And they chose the three births as enemies to get it over with faster. They were born as Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, the adored of the Daityas and the Danavas. Hiranyakashipu was the elder, while Hiranyaksha, the younger, was born afterwards. Hiranyakashipu was slain by Sri Hari, who had taken the form of a lion, or of a half man, half lion, Lord Narasingha. And Hiranyaksha was killed by him, even if he assumes the body of a boar for the sake of lifting up the earth. Anxious to get rid of his son, Prahlada, the beloved of Lord Vishnu, Hiranyakashipu inflicted on him tortures of various kinds in order to bring about his death, but could not kill with his devices that perfectly tranquil boy, who had identified himself with all living beings, looked upon all with the same eye, and was invested with a divine glory. Then they were born as a pair of Rakshasas, the tormentors of the worlds, Ravana and Kumbhakarna, sons of the sage Vishrava by Keshini. In order to redeem them from the curse, the Lord slew them in that birth too, assuming the form of the scion of Raghu, Sri Rama. You will hear about the valor of Sri Rama from the lips of the sage Markandeya, O king. This is Narada saying this to Yudhishthira, that Yudhishthira will learn about Rama from Markandeya. Those very Rakshasas, Ravana and Kumbhakarna, were born again in the Kshatriya race as Shishupala and Dantavaktra, the sons of Yudhishthira's maternal aunts. Their sins having been destroyed by the Sudarshana Chakra of Lord Sri Krishna, they have now, at the end of their 3 incarnations, been redeemed from the curse, having been exalted to the state of absorption into the immortal Lord through contemplation intensified by 3 lifetimes of constant enmity. They returned to the presence of Sri Hari as attendants of Lord Vishnu. Yudhishthira submitted, how did intense hatred come to be developed in the mind of Hiranyakashipu towards his own high-souled and beloved son? Also tell me, O glorious sage, the circumstances under which exclusive devotion to the immortal Lord sprang up in the heart of Prahlada. Thus ends the first discourse, forming part of the introduction to the story of Prahlada in Book 7 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 2. Hiranyakashipu rids his mother of her grief. Narada replied, on his brother having been slain thus by Sri Hari, who had assumed the form of a boar, Hiranyakashipu, the elder brother, O Raja, felt agonized with anger and grief. Whirling with rage, he closely bit his lips. Nay, with his eyes burning through anger, he gazed intently at the sky, which looked misty due to the smoke issuing from his fiery eyes, and spoke thus, with a frowning aspect terrible to look at because of his fearful teeth and fierce glances. And raising up his trident, he spoke as follows to the Danavas in his court. O Danavas and Daityas, O Dvimurdha, referring to a two-headed monster who was in his court. Triaksha, the three-eyed demon. Shambara, Shatabahu, the 100-armed. Hayagriva, the horse-headed demon. This is separate from the Hayagriva avatar of Vishnu. Namochi, Paka, Ilvala, Viprachiti, Puloma, Shakuna, and others. Listen all to my word, and then let it be carried out at once. There should be no delay. Puloma, by the way, this Asura who's in his court, is the father of Shachi, who married Indra. So Hiranyakashipu says to his courtiers, my beloved and devoted brother has been caused by the petty enemies to be slain at the hands of Hari, who, though impartial, has been won over to their side through services rendered to him. With the copious blood of that god, who through all effulgence assumed the semblance of a wild animal through a deceptive trick and has relinquished his nature, who follows anyone who adores him and is therefore fickle-minded as a child, when his head has been severed by my spear, I shall gratify my bloodthirsty brother and be relieved of my agony. When that wily adversary has been disposed of, the Devas, whose very life is Vishnu, will wither away like the boughs on a tree whose roots have been cut off. Meanwhile, resort you to the earth, made prosperous by the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas, and exterminate all those engaged in austerities, sacrificial performances, and the study of the Vedas, observing sacred vows and practicing charity. The god Vishnu depends for his existence on the rituals of the twice-born, being yajna personified and an embodiment of dharma. He is the ultimate resort of the devas, the rishis, the pitris, and other living beings, and the final goal of dharma. Repair to each such territory where there are brahmanas. What he actually said, where there are the twice-born, so brahmanas, kshatriyas, and vaishyas. Cows, the varnas, and ashramas, and rituals. Set fire to them and cut them to pieces. Reverently bowing to the aforementioned command of their lord, the demons began to oppress the people accordingly. They burnt towns and villages, cow pens and gardens, cornfields and parks, hermitages and mines, farmers' hamlets, villages at the foot of mountains, and stations of herdsmen and cities. Just to note that when the translation says things like cornfields, obviously that's not referring to corn in our modern sense of maize. It's like barley corn or other crops. Some demons demolished with spades, bridges, defensive walls, and city gates, while others, with axes in their hands, cut down fruit-bearing trees which served as a means of livelihood to the people. And others burnt down the dwellings of the people with flaming brands. When the people were thus oppressed again and again by the followers of the Lord of the Daityas, the Devas deserted heaven and wandered over the earth unperceived, hiding, in other words, fearing the siege of Svarga, which would otherwise have caught them. Having offered water and other oblations to the spirit of his deceased brother, Hiranyakashipu, who felt miserable, comforted his brother's sons, Shakuni, Shambara, Drishta, Bhuta Santapana, Vraka, Kalanabha, Mahanabha, Harishmasru, and Utkacha. Knowing as he did what was appropriate to a particular time and place, he addressed the following to their mother and his own sister-in-law, Roshabhanu, as well as to Diti, his own mother, in soft words, O Lord of men. Hiranyakashipu said, Mother, O mother, sister-in-law, and sons. He refers to his brother's sons as his own sons, now that they've lost their father. You ought not to lament the hero, Hiranyaksha. The death of the brave in front of their enemy is praiseworthy and coveted. Dwelling together in this world of created beings, collected at one place, and separated by providence on account of their actions, is like the gathering of men in a shed containing a reservoir of water, O virtuous mother. In other words, that they gather, they drink, and then they disperse. The soul is eternal, free from decay, taintless, omnipresent, all-knowing, and transcendent. It assumes bodies, procuring the objects of senses by its own maya. As due to a running stream, the trees appear as though moving in the rippling reflections in the water. And as due to one's rotating eyes, the earth appears to revolve. Like if you spin around, it appears that the world is spinning. So when the mind is agitated by the gunas, the soul, which is really unagitated, acquires homogeneity indeed with the mind, O Blessed One, so that, though detached from the body, etc., it appears as if endowed with the body, and so on. To identify with the body, the self, which has no connection with the body, this is the perversion of the soul. It is from such identification that there ensues its union with agreeable objects and separation from disagreeable ones, and vice versa, action and transition from one embodied state to another, birth and death, grief of various kinds mentioned in the scriptures, want of discrimination between matter and spirit, and so on, anxiety and forgetting the aforementioned distinction, even though having known it once. On this subject, the wise narrate the following ancient legend too, in the form of a dialogue between Yama and the relations of a deceased person. Please listen to it. In the Ushinara territory, there lived an illustrious king, Suyagnya by name. He was killed by his enemies in a battle, and his kith and kin sat around him even as he lay on the field of battle, stained with blood and biting his lips in anger. So evidently he's dying, but not dead yet. His jeweled armor smashed, his ornaments and wreaths of flowers fallen off, his heart pierced through with an arrow, his hair thrown about, his eyes sunk deep, his lotus face covered with dust, and his weapons and arms cut into pieces. Closely observing their husband, the lord of the Ushinaras, reduced to such a plight by providence, the queens felt distressed, violently beating their breast with their hands again and again, and exclaiming, "We are lost, O Lord!" They dropped down beside his feet. Weeping loudly and bathing the lotus feet of their beloved husband with their tears, tinted reddish with the saffron paste on their breasts, and causing grief in the heart of men, the ladies wailed piteously, their locks and jewels loosened and displaced. Alas, by the pitiless providence, O Lord, you have been reduced to a state beyond the range of our sight. Once the life-giver of the Ushinaras, the inhabitants of this land, you have now been made by him the augmenter of their woes. How can we, O ruler of the earth, live without you, our dearest friend, who were disposed to appreciate whatever was done to you? Permit us, servants of your feet, O brave one, to follow you to the place where you will go. While they lamented as aforesaid, clutching their dead husband and unwilling to have him carried out for the cremation, the sun actually sank below the horizon. On hearing the lament of the relations of the deceased monarch, it is said, Yama himself appeared there in the form of a child and addressed them. Yama said, "Oh, the infatuation of these, my superiors in age, who clearly perceive the course of the world. Though themselves alike in nature, they bewail in vain the man who has returned to the source whence he came. Ah, most blessed are we that have no anxiety, and who are not being devoured by wolves and other carnivorous animals, though weak and forsaken here by our parents. For he alone is the protector who protects us in the womb. The wise, O ladies, call the animate and inanimate creation a plaything on the hands of that Lord who creates it by will, who alone, all-powerful as he is, protects it, and who, though imperishable, destroys it. He is competent to maintain and dissolve it. A thing protected by destiny remains intact, even though dropped on the road, while that which is consigned to destruction by fate perishes, even though staying at home. A forlorn creature watched over by Providence survives in the forest, while he whose doom is decreed by Providence will not survive even though guarded at home. The bodies of every description come into being and perish at the appointed time due to a variety of karmas determining their species. The spirit, however, which is altogether different, is not bound by the laws related to the body, even though dwelling in it. This body is born due to the ignorance of the jiva, though it is different because it is perceived and is material, like a house. Like an object made up of aqueous, earthy, or fiery atoms, the body, which is made up of the atoms of water, earth, and fire, gets transformed in the course of time and ultimately perishes. As fire existing in pieces of wood is observed to be distinct as the air, though existing in the body, appears as existing separately, and as ether, though pervading everywhere, does not cling to any substance, so the spirit, the foundation of all products of matter, is distinct from them. Indeed, O fools, here lies the body called Suyagnya that you lament. He who was the hearer and the speaker in this body could never be seen even before, nor is the great vital principle, which is the foremost, the hearer or the speaker. As for the soul, which in a body is endowed with the senses, is different from the vital principle as well as from the body. The all-pervading spirit that is different from the body accepts bodies high and low and characterized by the elements, the indriyas, and the mind, and even actually gives up such identification by force of its own discrimination. Action proves to be a source of bondage only so long as the soul stands identified with a subtle body. From such identification follow the perversion of the soul and misery, which are conceived in illusion. To look upon the gunas or speak of them as real, this is a false prepossession. Like a fanciful conception or a dream, every sensuous pleasure is unreal. Hence the knowers of truth grieve neither for that which is abiding, nor for that which is transient in this world. Nor can the nature of those who are given to grieving be changed. A certain fowler, who had been created as a death for birds, spread his net in a forest and employing allurements, caught birds wherever he could. A pair of fork-tailed shrikes were seen moving about there. Of them, the female Sorry about that. I think my internet got cut off for a minute. I'll just finish this one discourse. This fowler lured the female of a mated pair of fork-tailed shrike birds. Subject to the control of time, the said female bird got entangled in the meshes of the net. Sore afflicted to see her thus involved in danger, yet incapable of doing anything, the helpless male bird bewailed his miserable mate out of affection, saying such things as, "Oh, what will the mighty yet merciless providence do with my wretched wife, pitiable in every way and grieving for my miserable self? Rather let the deity take me. What is the use to me of this wretched half-body, surviving miserably and dragging a desolate existence? My youngs of poor luck await in the nest their mother. How shall I nourish those motherless young ones still unfledged?" Hidden close by and impelled by death, the same fowler pierced with an arrow the male shrike, sore with separation from its beloved mate and wailing thus, its throat choked with tears. Not foreseeing your own death and lamenting your husband in this way, you foolish women will not get him back even in hundreds of years. Hiranyakashipu went on. While the child was thus discoursing, all the relations of King Suyagnya felt astonished and realized everything as transient and unreal. Having narrated this, Yama disappeared on that very spot. The relations of Suyagnya too performed what was conducive to his future good. Hence don't you grieve for another, nor even for yourselves. Apart from the preconceived notion distinguishing one's own self from another, which is nothing but ignorance, what distinction is there between one's own self and another, or again between one's own possession and that belonging to another, and the eyes of embodied souls in this world? Narada continued, hearing this speech of the Lord of the Daityas, his mother Diti, along with her daughter-in-law, the widow of Hiranyaksha, gave up sorrowing for her son and fixed her mind on the truth. Thus ends the second discourse, entitled Diti Rid of Her Sorrow, in Book 7 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I think it's probably time for us to pause there today. The whole story of Hiranyakashipu and Prahlada is very long. The Bhagavatam tells it in great detail. So we'll get more into that next time. It is interesting that Hiranyakashipu, while clearly maddened by his own grief, was able to be so wisely comforting to other people about the death of his own brother. But very clearly, despite being the narrator of that last story, it certainly didn't do anything for him. He was still obsessed with vengeance even while comforting his own mother and his sister-in-law and his nephews. All right. Thank you all for coming. Sorry about that.
Thank you very, very, very much, Devla. I always appreciate your commentary. It's beautiful. Yeah, we learn a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Hey, David, this is Andy.
Yeah.
Hey, what happened at the end of that chapter?
That last one?
Right here. Yeah.
The last one was just Hiranyakashipu, the Daitya Hiranyakashipu, comforting his mother and his sister-in-law and his nephews about the death of their family member Hiranyaksha. But despite
Right.
this,
And then Didi.
sorry,
what
what
does it say about Didi at the end? What, Didi, is that her name?
Diti, yeah, that's their mother. Hiranyakashipu
Right.
and Hiranyaksha's
what did
mother.
it say about her? And what did it say about her right at the end of the chapter?
At the very end, it said that she gave up it said that there she gave up sorrowing and fixed her mind on the truth. Although I suspect you may be getting at a point here. Not permanently. She gave up sorrowing perhaps for the time being. But as we got just earlier today, after she then lost her second son, after Vishnu killed Hiranyakashipu as well, she then went back to wanting vengeance for them both, hence the whole conceiving of the Maruts story.
Right. Yeah, that was what I was wondering about. Like,
yeah.
To what degree are we talking about with that statement? You know, I'm not actually.
Yeah, it definitely was a limited degree. I take the scripture at its word that she did give up sorrowing and fixed her mind on the truth for the time. But after Vishnu killed her second son as well, that was kind of something snapped in her, and she went back to seeking vengeance for them both. Yeah.
Yep, I would say a degree of a threshold.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think you probably want to stop the recording.
Yeah.
You may want to